welcome to Paradelphia Radio. This is Rick Pruitt here once again in the Toxic Studios, and I actually have partial crew here with me tonight.
Yes, Queen.
Returning once again is Miss Jenna B.
Hey, y'all.
Of the Jenna's Bees fame.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, am I famous now?
Well, I try to talk you up. It's how we get promotion for the show.
Let me tell you, I am the most
fake it till you make it.
I am the most comfortable I've ever been on this show right now.
Well, it's
I
because
am
you're
so comfy.
because you look like you just smoked a doob
I wish I
on
did.
the couch. Yeah.
on the couch.
Yeah.
That's Fishman's job.
The other voice you hear is someone who hasn't been on the show, but what, 3 times in the last 6 months?
It's like I say, it's crazy because, it was one of the things before summertime. I was like, it's great because the way my work schedule works out, summertime's going to be good because nothing interferes. But then it's been such a busy, crazy summer.
Right.
It's like, I don't know, just everything coming up. It has. It's been insane. But
wild,
we've had a lot of things happening. But yeah,
a wild and crazy summer it has been.
Yeah.
And we are winding towards the Halloween season.
We are
fast approaching,
which is another busy time for everything else.
Oh yeah,
It's
I can't even believe that we're already at the end of August.
Oh, I know.
That's insane.
I know. I'm going to Salem in 4 weeks. Salem, Massachusetts.
You know what I heard the other? And this is gonna lead right into our first topic of discussion here. But I heard that I don't know which show it is that's going to be doing a live ghost hunt in Salem this year in October 4th.
Oh my gosh, that's when I'll be there.
Yeah, they're doing 3.
Wait, and who?
I don't remember who it was. I think it's a new. I believe it's a new show, or it might be a combination of personalities from various shows.
Oh my gosh, how cool!
Something like that. The reason I know is because I told you I listened to Darkness Radio, Dave Schrader's show,
right?
And he's one of the people that's going to be there. So he was promoting it last week.
That's cool.
So yeah, so if you're going to be there October 4th,
I will.
3 different locations around Salem, they're going to be doing live ghost hunts on TV.
I'm trying.
Oh my gosh, well that's cool because I will be there from the 2nd to the 5th, and is that 2nd to the 5th? I think, and yeah, so I'll be making sure that I go on Paradelphia lives and I'll show them up.
Show them up,
I'll be
baby.
like, listen here, hoes.
I'll try to see if I can look it up. That's what I was saying. I'm trying to look up
Paradelphia.
October 4th Salem, but we'll see what happens if I can find it.
So
anyway,
as I said, this is going to lead into another announcement that we are finally able to make here on Paradelphia.
Yes,
we've alluded to a project that we've been involved with for a few months now with some pretty famous folks from TV land.
Oh yeah,
and we are
not the network TV land. All in general.
Yeah,
I love Leave It to Beaver.
In general TV land.
Yeah, right.
The TV universe. And so we are finally able to announce that Doug and myself are going to be appearing on a episode of Ghost Nation, the new show led by Jason Hawes and his group that used to be part of the Ghost Hunters.
Right. Yep.
They're a brand new show going to be on Travel Channel starting in October, and we are going to have an episode that is going to be surrounding the haunting at Mario Cerrito's home down in Mantua.
Yes. Yep.
So I know, Doug, you got quite involved with this. You want to talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it was crazy because, again, I mean, we're still, obviously, we can't reveal too much, obviously, but now that the show has been announced coming on, the premiere for the new show is October 11th, which is Friday night on the Travel Channel. Not sure time yet. We'll announce that, obviously, but we are going to be episode 3, and looking at it, that's going to be October 25th. And that'll actually be the episode right before Halloween. But yeah, I was reached out by them officially, just trying to find out, just for my involvement in having jumps, if there were any cases I knew of, and of course working with Mario and his family for a while with what they have going on. I mentioned that, and they really took an interest to it. So it went from, I mean, there were a lot of things that changed with how they wanted to do it. And again, they being part of the show, or knowing that we had our own show, got some involvement with that. You'll see. But yeah, I actually, and I had a chance to, one of the nights they investigated, I actually went in and did part of an investigation with them. So it was a really cool experience, and I'm very excited to see. I've heard from the network. They have finished editing this episode. It's all ready to go.
Very cool.
And they actually they said that they feel that I'll be very happy with how everything turned out. So
What day of the week does it?
Friday.
Friday, right?
Yeah, the
Oh,
11th.
okay.
Yeah. So, and again, October 25th is again. They didn't say that officially, but looking at where it's episode 3 and doing that, that's kind of what I
Doing the math.
calculated. Yeah. So, and we'll have more details as we get
Alright.
closer.
So
But big time.
get your popcorn ready.
Yeah, big time. Because
Oh,
there's because I filmed another one too, which I haven't heard anything about that yet. But I sat down in Philly a few months ago and I shared an experience I had at Finn's Point National Cemetery
Right.
for a show that comes on the Travel Channel, also called Paranormal Terror in the Woods.
Okay.
And it's one of them shows where you sit down and talk about it, and you actually have someone acting it out, playing you.
Right.
So that, I'm not sure when that season 2 is coming out, but I'll be at some point appearing on that too, and it's going to be
Wow.
crazy seeing who they have play me.
Well, they probably had to put in an ad for someone ugly.
Yes,
obviously.
exactly. So
Wanted ugly man for sure.
that-
Ugly
yeah.
tattooed man.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, with but with a Ouija board and all this other crazy stuff. But that's one of the big cool things I can't wait to see. Like, who did they cast for, me?
It's probably gonna be someone that looks nothing like him.
yeah, right.
It'd be like a tall, blonde, good-looking dude.
Uh-huh.
Hi, I'm Doug.
Hello.
Or just a black
They
man.
call me a yeah.
A black man.
Oh yeah, exactly. They call me
Whatever. You know what?
or I'll be a woman.
Yeah,
Hi.
that'll be
So
great.
hi, I'm Doug. Like some biker chick. What are you doing? I'm Doug.
A little person.
Yeah. There you go.
We get the dude from Game of Thrones.
Yeah. That hey,
Tyrion.
that Lord, Tyrion. Hey, that's my man. Come on now. Yeah, I don't mind Tyrion. So. Yeah.
All right.
So I'm becoming a Travel Channel friggin' regular name. You'll be able to search me on your Xfinity one of these days.
Oh,
Oh
Lord.
boy.
Anyway.
His head's getting bigger by the
Yeah.
second.
Oh yeah, you have room. Anyway.
Anyway,
It's a beautiful one, though.
so tonight, in about 25 minutes, the main bulk of the show is going to be us discussing a book called Evil Archaeology with the lady who wrote it, Dr. Heather Lynn. She'll be appearing here in a few minutes, and this is one that we've been trying to get on for a while now. We had her scheduled about a month ago, and that had to get canceled, for reasons that just it didn't work out that night.
Crap happens. you
Crap
know?
happens. But tonight we are happy to have her on the show,
Yeah.
and we'll have her here, like I said, in about 20, 25 minutes or so.
Mm-hmm.
It's a real interesting book because it digs into a topic that we don't often talk about here. We don't get into the archaeology stuff and
Right.
the lost stuff that's found out of place objects and the giant bones that are found of people that are supposed to have been 10 feet tall and
Right. Yeah,
you know-
the big skulls that are
Right,
all
so-
kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, so Heather gets into a lot of that in the book, and she also knows about a lot of that from other books and other research she's done. So it's going to be a real interesting interview.
It's been. I'll tell you something. When it comes just to archaeology itself, especially when I visited places anywhere where you see they have these digs. I've always looked is that's got to be such a fascinating job because you see these where basically you're just digging.
Yeah.
And it's these known spots where you do know there's historical significance and something did take place there, and you're digging down, and I mean sometimes you can go just as a couple feet down and start finding things that are hundreds of years old. I mean, I always thought that'd be one of the coolest jobs ever, just knowing that what you found or what you're holding is something that hasn't been held in such a long time, and I mean just anything like that.
To get paid for doing what you did as a kid in the backyard.
Right, exactly. You know,
you went out and dug a hole.
No, my
Exactly.
nails.
Now you get paid for it.
I pay too much for my nails. I couldn't do that.
You paid too much for your nails when you were 5?
Maybe I ought to
I was
invite something to
bougie.
put over your hands and call it gloves or something. Maybe
God.
I don't know.
Then no one will be able to see my nails. And what's the point of getting my nails done if no one's going to see them?
Nobody sees them now. You're on radio.
In fact,
That's not true. I post on my Instagram at the real Jenna B all the time when I get my new nails done.
You post your nails.
Yeah, I'm like fresh Manny.
How many followers do you get for your nails?
I have almost 1,000 followers.
You should make a site just for your nails.
yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's such a good. Look, Mike is like all for it.
See?
Yeah.
I'm
Absolutely.
down.
Feet, nails, anything.
Yes, makeup.
I give you all these ideas
I'm
every
telling
week.
you. But
I
no,
know he's gonna start charging.
That's right.
Well, no, and one more thing I wanted to add too, going with that. I was down in my gosh, Virginia, where they have the 3 settlements.
Roanoke?
Not Roanoke. Anyway,
Jamestown?
Jamestown, all that.
Times?
Colonial. Yeah, Virginia. I'm sorry.
Like 4,000
I know.
cities in
I
Virginia.
had like a brain
I'd
fart
hit one
there.
eventually.
But I've like where they have Jamestown and all that. I've been there twice, and there's actually they have a couple of places where it's these buildings that they've restored, and where they did a dig, they actually have like a glass floor, and they left some of the artifacts down there, and you can actually see those. So it's
They have that over in Philly, the George Washington House, right in front of Independence Hall.
right. That's right. I have been. I've seen that too.
Yeah.
I forgot. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is real neat. Yeah.
I've been wanting to get on the hop on, hop off tour in Philly because I feel like all I do in Philly is go party. And every time I'm there, I'm like, I want to learn history. We are in one of the greatest cities in America.
The hop on, hop off tour sounds like something you might find in like. Well, I can't say because you brought your daughter.
By the way, Lily, do you want to yell hi real quick? Say hi. My little daughter, her birthday's on the 30th.
And
so,
that's
you
the
know.
reason we have to be appropriate
This
tonight.
is her birthday present, even though she's been here a bunch of times.
Listen,
now.
I am her niece, so
But,
I'm
you're her niece?
You're her niece. Wow, that kind of.
Wow,
Anyway.
I am her aunt,
But
so
no,
I can get away with it.
That hop on. I've never done it. Did it like at all, but I have actually heard people that I know have done it and actually say it is pretty cool. In Philly.
I was on it when I went to Ireland, but it's
Right.
the same company and they do it the same way. Like they literally stop at like of the places.
Do they serve beer?
Yeah,
You can take alcohol. The one on Ireland, you could take alcohol on it.
Well, that's
we're not in Ireland here.
in
so
Ireland,
I
you turn
know.
your faucets on and alcohol comes out. That's
not going to do me
just
much
like
good.
when
in
I
Philly.
when I went to Cancun, you showered in Corona.
Oh my gosh.
But
All
yeah,
right.
so
before we get to our interview for the evening, Jenna B had an assignment, which I've confirmed that she actually did do this week for her Jenna's Bees.
I tried to do it last week, but I was scared.
I remember you actually sent me a text because I wasn't here last week, but I remember you had sent me a text a couple days before. She's like, what was the name of that movie again?
Because I was about to watch it, and then I watched it, and it was scary.
So, that said, Jen's assignment this week was one that I gave her. It's one of my actually all-time favorite movies. It was an old Hammer movie from back in the day called 1973 called Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter.
Yep.
Okay.
And the write-up for this, the general, I guess IMDb write-up for this says, debonair supernatural expert Captain Kronos and his hunchback assistant Grost meet their match when they encounter a village where vampires have been stealing the vitality of young women, leaving them elderly and decrepit. Armed with his sword and formidable deductive reasoning, Kronos begins to solve the macabre mystery with evidence pointing to the aristocratic Lady Derwand and her family as prime suspects.
Yep.
Didn't they do a newer movie, Vampire Hunters or something like that? Like, I don't know.
That was Abe Lincoln.
That's
yeah,
right.
Abe
okay.
Lincoln,
yeah,
man.
yeah.
Totally
Vampire.
different movie.
Yeah.
Wow.
Big time.
So I watched it. So first of all, I really loved that they were British. Thought that was fabulous.
And that's it.
A great touch. A great
Well,
touch.
all the Hammer films had British accents.
Oh, did they?
They
Well,
were all that gothic British settings.
Yeah.
I only saw the
Great
one.
touch. You do know that wasn't a part of the writing. They were just actually British actors.
Actually British.
She's like, that was. I love how
thought
they
they were
wrote.
Americans.
I love how they wrote the British in there. You know?
Well, because actually I was going to say that some of the people didn't sound really British, but I guess they
Some
were.
of them weren't.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So then that
Yeah.
makes
It's
sense.
the fake British accent.
So let me try to sum up what I thought. So I really liked it. It was very interesting. See, I come from generation. Am I Gen X or am I a millennial?
You're definitely a millennial.
Am I?
Oh yeah.
Anyway,
I don't know because you were born in 90s.
I was born in 91. I actually think I think Gen X started in 95.
But I think-
Millennial start in 95.
Yeah, but it
You wouldn't
starts
be
when you're
Gen
like
X.
10.
I'm Gen X. That's way
Yeah,
older
that's
than you.
When
old.
you're 10
Okay.
years old, I think
No
that's
offense.
when they start what you're in. Like I was like considered like 90s in a sense so you're like 2000 into like 2010 kind of things. That makes sense?
No, because I was born in 91.
Okay, but you didn't know anything the first 10 years.
Yes, I did.
Anyway, go ahead.
Anyway, so I am a millennial or whatever the heck I am. So I obviously grew up on Twilight and
Yeah.
and you know what's so funny? I wanted, because I like to watch all of my movies like the day before the show or like the day of the show. And so this weekend I got this really strange hankering to watch Twilight, which has to do with vampires. And I actually thought it was I was glad I watched it because I almost kind of compared the two and I didn't want to, but I liked it. It was cute. It was a really cute movie. One of my favorite parts was the girl that was in the bed looking a hot mess. She was the mom. I think she was the mom. Did they keep calling her mom?
Who looks good going to bed?
I'm trying to remember what her name was.
Well, the reason that I like the movie, and this will give you some idea where my 13-year-old mind was when I first saw the movie.
Because you like Twilight the second.
No, not Twilight.
Because that's such an old movie. But anyway.
2 words: Caroline Munro.
Marilyn's sister.
She was she was the girl who was the main their partner.
She was a hottie.
Dude.
She was very gorgeous.
She has been
Gorgeous.
my crush since I was like 12 years old.
Yes, and I was just going to
Caroline,
say I was obsessed with her hair.
I gotta look
and
it
it
up.
really kind of made me laugh because what year was this kind of based in? Like this?
It was probably the
1400s?
movies. No. The movie would have been based probably in like the. I think Captain Kronos was supposed to have been a captain in the French army or something like. It would have been like the 1700s.
I thought it was like the medieval times.
You said Caroline
did.
Munro because I typed in
Yeah.
Carolyn Munro and it says American pornographic actress. I think I have the wrong name in there.
So-
This is why we don't let Doug Google.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I see it. Yeah.
So
I see now. Okay.
I did like it. That was kind of cool. I really thought it was interesting how they kept trying to like kill the vampires, but they only bled when they died.
Right.
Well, like once a month.
Well,
That Stupid.
did you like the part where the guy Kronos' friend became a vampire and they used him as like a test subject?
Yes. Okay. So one of the parts I was like, ooh, why did they? Ooh,
Yeah.
It was when they had a guy strapped to the chair.
Right.
And he wouldn't die.
Right.
So then they hung him while he was attached to a freaking chair. I'm like, bro, that is the worst way to go. But he still didn't die.
Right.
He's a
And then
vampire.
all it took was them to light a friggin' match. And all he had to do was show him the fire, and he got old and he died. And literally the guy was like, all we did was show him the light.
Well, vampires
something.
don't like light, like or things like that.
Well, these vampires were like fine. And the part where the lady got attacked by the bat in the face, honey, as soon as that happened, I went, pull it the frig off. It was like on her face.
Have
and
you ever been attacked by a bat?
Personally, no.
I wouldn't assume it's that easy.
But I'm just saying, what is your natural instinct to, if something is hurting you, you're going to automatically like brush it off. Like if I'm being attacked by a dog, I'm trying to get the dog off of me.
Right, but bats are like giant squirrels that fly.
Pretty
Yes,
much.
but her hands.
Like imagine
she
a
was
squirrel
like,
that flies attaching itself to your
with
face.
sharper teeth.
But she was
Right.
just like, oh my gosh, I'm putting my hands in the air, even though y'all can't see besides Rick. And was like, oh my gosh, I am being attacked. And then she died. And I'm like, well, you big dummy, you should have pulled the bat off of you. Maybe someone could have sucked the venom out like you do with a snake. So that was kind of interesting.
This is why we don't show these films to millennials.
yeah, right.
You asked.
Because they don't glitter or glow. or whatever.
That was very disappointing. There's nobody glittering.
Yeah, nobody glittered back in those days.
But I
Thank
kind of
God.
compared I forget her name on the movie. The girl that you said was
Caroline Munro.
Was that her name on the movie?
Oh no. I forget what her name was in the movie.
Yeah, I do too. I compared her kind of to Bella and Captain Kronos, even though he wasn't the vampire, to Edward, and it was kind of interesting. I compared a lot.
So their little love tryst.
Yeah, but her hair was very shiny for it being like they didn't bathe but once like a month.
Yeah.
Like I don't know if she was dry shampooing it, if they had it back at the French
they
Rev,
didn't
or
invent
what.
water back then.
So I give her an assignment to watch a horror movie. She's worried about
She's
the
watching
product used on the
Twilight.
girl's hair.
Right, exactly.
I did. I was like,
It
wow.
wasn't Pert Plus.
Her hair is shiny. It must be Maybelline. Yeah. So I mean, I'm gonna give it out of 5 stars. I'm gonna give it a solid 4.
Yeah, you liked it.
It was an interesting. was an interesting movie.
It's definitely one of my favorite Hammer films. I like the adventure part of it. I like some of it's kind of funny. There are some scary parts in it.
I didn't jump.
Caroline Munro, that goes without saying.
Yeah, I mean,
it sounds like that was just the main idea.
I mean,
for
if you've ever seen Caroline Munro, you'd understand. Back in the, I mean, she's like
I
70-ish now.
I was gonna say I looked it up.
Looks like she still got it.
Yeah, no, she was.
She look bad now. Consider.
No, she was pretty hot. I looked up a photo.
Yeah, that was my first thought, and then I was really sad there was no boobies though.
Oh
well, there was plenty of, but he didn't have full boob. But let me tell you something. There was a lot of low cut. That was Hammer. Hammer did all the low cut stuff.
There was a lot of the SEX.
Full or half. Okay, anyway.
There was a lot of the SEX, and I was like, yes, queen. But then I didn't see no boobie.
Well, they had to keep it above brow for the.
Listen, I
the early 70s.
I was gonna say you got to think Elvis time. If you showed waist down, it was.
I still have to say, Toxic Avenger is my favorite so far.
Yeah.
Because that honestly, I thought it was just a funny movie, but it was a good movie. So y'all go watch it.
All right.
Live your best.
So we will definitely have to give Jen her next assignment here at the end of the show. We'll figure that out along the way.
I'm probably going to do some searching, see what I can find.
Just give me the Blair Witch Project. I love that movie.
I have it on DVD if you want.
It's really not a B movie.
Actually, what about
that's a pretty famous movie?
Have you got the Blair Witch Project, you got Book of Shadows, which was not the same people that did the original one, but the third Blair Witch Project from 2017, I think.
Yeah.
That one was by the same, in a sense, people as the first one.
Yeah. Next time you guys want to give me the helm on that one, I do have a love story for her when she's ready.
Oh, yeah?
A Blair Witch Project?
Do a love story.
Wait, the fact that the girl from Blair Witch Project is like a actual professional pot grower and like Chester,
That's a
PA.
different kind of love.
Oh. She is, though. She does that professionally. I found out, like, that Heather Donahue, she lives right across the river in Chester.
Are you saying the Blair Witch Project girl is your dealer?
Yeah, exactly. But no, she literally grows, like, pot for a living, and, like, she lives right across the river. Yeah.
Have her on the show.
All right. Well, with that information in tow, let's take our first break here, and we come back on the flip side. Hopefully we will have Dr. Heather Lynn on to talk about some evil archaeology. Back in a few. All right, we're back here on Paradelphia.
That was a hard stop.
That was a hard stop right there.
It wasn't supposed to be that hard.
That was a screeching halt right there. All right, joining us now is our guest for the evening. She has written a book called Evil Archaeology. Dr. Heather Lynn, she is a professor of history and a renegade archaeologist, and she's on a quest for truth behind some ancient mysteries. She left an academic job to pursue her fascination with the unexplained, and now she investigates things like ancient mysteries, lost civilizations, hidden history, and the occult. Heather, welcome to Paradelphia.
Hi, thank you for having me.
All right. You're very welcome. So this was quite the interesting book here. It was a really cool read. I honestly, when I started reading it, it took me a while to read it because just, life happens, but I kept picking it up and reading one chapter after another because it was just really, really interesting stuff. So I'm really looking forward to this here tonight.
Oh, well, thank you so much. That means a lot. I'm glad to hear that you enjoyed it.
Yep.
Been looking forward to speaking with you as well.
So now, as far as getting into how you got into this type of work, can you explain to the audience, how it is that I guess did you initially go for archaeology and then it kind of branched off into this the crazy world of the unknown, or is that how things happen?
A little bit, yeah, I would say so. I've always had a fascination with the unknown. It was sort of a pastime, and interested in late night radio and some alternative authors and that sort of thing. But it certainly wasn't a career choice. I ended up going to school, first community college, and I found that when I was there was a lot of blowback from some of the mainstream professors about those alternative researchers. There was this whole idea that almost as if they were threatened, that, there were this group of pseudoscientists out there threatening the mainstream narrative, and, they taught us that at all costs we had to make sure to debunk whenever we could and not let those ideas permeate the zeitgeist. And, and so I thought, well, I mean, I could see that that's, a concern perhaps, but the more I got into it, the more I saw that some of the authors that they would target a lot of times were ones that I'd be interested in. And while I wasn't necessarily buying into all the alternative theories, I was still interested. And I thought that it was, one of those things where if somebody's interested in, say, Indiana Jones or some alternative author or even something fiction, and that gets them asking questions, it might get them to do research or even go to college and major in something like history or archaeology, I thought, well, that's surely a good thing. Well, I didn't find that people agreed with me on that. In fact, it was quite the opposite. It was, no, we must distance ourselves. And,
Right.
And then I thought, well, that is what it is, but as soon as I got up into, my graduate work and so forth, I started to find a lot of more disturbing aspects of things. So things like money laundering and corruption and a lot of people doing a lot of different things to try to make sure that mainstream narrative, stayed intact. And so that got me a little disenchanted, but, it wasn't until I decided to put my foot down and, look into these alternative ideas and just use these skills that I got in university and maybe, I guess, well, as some people have since said, use them for evil and the dark side. Some of my colleagues have lamented that I've gone over to the dark side. But, I just say that that's fine. I think that these topics are interesting and they deserve to be looked at and presented to the public. And so, I thought, well, I'll just be the one to do it then.
Right. Now, with doing a show like Paradelphia, we deal with a lot of different topics that are not mainstream topics. But I've always thought that something like archaeology is something that's actually more likely to be provable because it's tangible. It's hard to prove life after death. It's hard to prove, vampirism and UFOs and all this crazy stuff we talk about. But when you're talking about giants and when you're talking about, humans being around for millions of years, there are actual tangible things you can see and experience, and people have found that prove that as long as people are willing to listen. So how much are we not being told, do you think?
Well, I think a lot of it, and for various reasons. Some of it is, again, that, not wanting to go against an established narrative. Another part of it is just sometimes apathy. Another part is a lack of cohesion in the discipline itself with regards to private industry getting involved with public funding and a lot of different, shady arrangements that way. And then others is just actually a lack of people involved in the endeavor to begin with, not enough people to translate tablets or, do that sort of research. So I think it's a perfect storm of factors. But I think something too, you bring up a really good point about archaeology being something potentially provable. And I think that is where it gets a little sticky in some regard because, the study of history in general is inherently qualitative. And, all qualitative research, that sort of research is based mostly in interpretation. And so it doesn't always rely on the numbers like quantitative research would be.
Right.
So you have this study of history, and then you have what used to be called antiquarianism. And that was, that was something that was practiced for a very long time. But it wasn't until, the late 1700s that actual archaeological excavations were happening. And at the time where it started to become organized into these antiquarian societies, it wasn't until the 19th century, so the 1800s. And so in a lot of ways, archaeology as a discipline is fairly new. And it branched away from history to try to become more scientific, more quantitative. And so it employs those scientific tools like, radiocarbon dating or, any of these different forms that you can use to quantify. But the problem is it's still inherently qualitative. And so it leaves this huge gap for argument. And while you have people who are on one side saying, oh, no, we can definitely prove this, well, you can in a lot of cases, like, with different bone matter or what have you. But then there's still an open area of questions that may surround it. So the context, the narrative, what happened. And because that gap is there, I think sometimes it creates a vacuum. And Some people will fill that vacuum with, their own theories, and they may be a little out there or interesting. And other people, they don't even want to explore those ideas. They want to stick clearly with the quantitative analysis and just leave it at that. But then I guess, in my view, leaving it at that is sort of what creates this problem for people, is this lack of knowledge. It's, you can go out there and measure the data, present it, or actually not present it publicly, but just put it in an academic journal that is hidden behind a paywall. Nobody ever sees it. So the public has a lot of questions. What's going on, And there's not enough people out there willing to take the time to analyze it, interpret it, and speak out to the public. And, so I think because of that, we get a lot of very interesting narratives, very interesting interpretations, and some of them are can be seen as more pseudo or fringe, but then other ones, may be fairly reasonable. So I think it's almost like a Wild West in some ways.
Right.
And I know the mainstream archaeological community has a big problem with that. They don't like that, but I think it's partially their fault for leaving that vacuum.
Yeah, it's a sense of an elitism, sort of.
Absolutely, and that was something that wasn't something that I could really, get on board with. I didn't come from an elite background in any way, shape, or form whatsoever. I actually left high school and ran away from home and traveled the country. I came from, all kinds of areas, lived down south, met a lot of different people, and I worked my way through school from, like I said, community college through bachelor's and so forth all the way. And so I really pulled and scratched my way. And so I I wasn't able to get full on elite in that regard. I just never.
That's probably a good thing.
Never could hold on to that mindset. Absolutely, I think so. It wasn't a good thing for my career in that way. I couldn't really play that whole political game they want you to play, because I just saw right through it, and it just was something that I got into the industry, if you will, because I love history. I have a passion, and I have a curiosity, and I want to know the answers. And when I find out this any sort of hint of those answers, I get so excited. I just want to share it with everybody. And so I found the best way for me to do that was just go right to people and write my own books and, sort of go that route.
Right. But here's the thing: rewriting history, there's inherent danger in that for you, I guess, in terms of your career and reputation. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes. There has been. It has its difficulties, and so I can't say it's all fun and games. I get a lot of interesting emails, a lot of different even threats in some points. I get strange letters. I get weird mail. Some of it's not as serious. Some of it is a little more, intimidating. Mm-hmm. And other times it just manifests in ways of, say, not getting a good job offer or something. If I wanted to go back and teach, I get sort of that look like, oh, I see your CV, and then, oh, you've done this work. Oh, okay. So my reputation precedes me.
Well, yeah, and hi, this is Doug, co-host. But now I actually, I can, in a sense, relate to what you were talking about. There was an incident a few years back, because I'm the same way. I'm very passionate about history, which that has led me for over a decade running a paranormal research team. And with that, I've done a lot of research, and there was one specific instance where I had found, digging into some old archives in one of the towns from where we live, that they had a record of a former slave who actually had gotten burned at the stake. It was the only incident where someone was burned at the stake in this local town. So I actually would mention that if I was doing some talking events. And I actually remember one time I had someone from the local county historical society come up to me and actually say, that's something that you should not or don't need to be sharing with people, because we don't want to talk about that. We don't want to have that reputation. And it's one of those things that I've always, in a sense, thought of or wondered, what is it that people, especially in that kind of field where they're dedicated, or their life career is history, why hide something like that? Yeah, sure, it's not one of the best historical type stories to have, but it's done and over with. It has happened. So what is their fear with wanting to share something like that? Why do you think people are so afraid of sharing the truth and hiding it?
I think, again, it's a variety of reasons, but I think mostly it has to do with saving face.
Right.
And a lot of times they want to look like they're the experts. I think the problem that we really have, just a systemic issue that we have.
Oh. Look, I think that was my fault. I see, it's me. It's my bad luck now.
I think we lost Heather there, I believe.
The answer.
Any
of that uncertainty can break apart the whole veil of authority. So I think it really, at the end of the day, it's about protecting their own vision of authority that they have over people.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Sorry about that, Heather. We lost you on this end for a few seconds there.
Right.
We heard most. We heard most of that answer.
We got the gist of it. Yeah, it was only a second, but no, yeah, and I can agree absolutely. Yeah, it's just a shame. Like history, you want truth, so why not share it? It's not like we caused it, So, but yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's too bad.
Right.
Because I think that we all need to ask these questions, and I think it's exciting to find out new possibilities and.
Right.
Absolutely.
So now getting into your book, Evil Archaeology, the gist of the book is right there in the title on the cover, Evil. You talk about that in many different forms in all the different chapters of this book. But you start out talking about, just in general, how what we consider these days to be evil is not necessarily evil. It's just sort of the way that it's been angled by certain people in power through the years. Can you speak to that a little bit and explain why and how this was done?
Sure. I think what it is the idea of demons, the devils, the hauntings, all these amazing things that we get out of media and pop culture. They're very clearly defined in entertainment. But if you look in the past, it looks a lot different than what the movies show us. There are similarities, which I found fascinating, and I referenced that in the book when I discussed the demons, like the Mesopotamian demons and their relationship to a movie, The Exorcist, or that sort of thing. So there's definitely a connection. But what I found is that this idea of evil is something we've been dealing with for quite a long time, and we don't really know how to define it. People recognize it when they encounter it. And a lot of the sites and artifacts that I explore in the book seem evil upon first look. But when you study them in greater detail, you find that it's not that they're evil per se. And in archaeology, one of the most important concepts is context. And, that's literally the position of an artifact or site in time and space. And so that context, includes the sort of the idea of how the archaeological object got there and what happened to it since. So again, that idea of the narrative, the interpretation. So without that context, sites that we don't consider evil, like Stonehenge, those can just look like a pile of rocks. And so without context, the demon statues and things that we see in artifacts that look frightening, they could actually look cartoonish if we didn't already have this pre-existing narrative that tells us to fear it and that it was something scary. And so if you look through the past, how did we get this idea, this pre-existing narrative? A lot of it had to do with the development of, different religions, a lot of Abrahamic religions. And I don't mean to actually come off as though I'm picking on Christianity when I say this, because I'm actually Christian myself. And so it wasn't so much that as it was just historical fact that when the Christian church spread, they would go into, small villages and they would find folk deities. And so they would make those deities to be something evil. So they'd literally demonize them. And that was their way of asserting power and getting rid of the old world and ushering in the new world. And so you have figures like Pan, who is recognizable from the Greek mythology as a being that is a satyr. He has cloven hooves. He's half goat, half man. And eventually what you find is that would be the model for the devil that we see now, that would be, red with the cloven hooves and whatnot. And so you see these links all throughout the past. And so that was something that I found interesting to me, that this idea of evil, is often an interpretation. That's not to say that there is not evil in the world, and that's something that, I reference in the book as well, about a particular instance of a serial killer and how there's, definitely bad things happening, but just in the idea of objects themselves
Right.
and what they represent. It's something that I take a journey through the book to look at and ask about various sites and relics. Are they evil? Did they represent evil? Or have they been misunderstood or misinterpreted? And do they have different meanings that we can learn from?
Right. And the one thought I had was reading most of the book. You said you wrote about this all the way through the book, and it was interesting because I thought about this fairly often in different chapters. And it's the old saying that history is written by the victors. And so all of these ideas that we have that you're speaking to, right now, were ideas we have in place because somebody won a war or somebody was more powerful than another group or whatever the situation may have been that played out. And that's really the thing that determined our interpretation of what these artifacts and these different deities are.
Absolutely. I think that's very well put. And that's exactly what I hope to get across in the book itself.
Now,
and take a look at basically those connections. So, yes.
Now, one of the things that I've always found interesting, and I don't know if you have an opinion on this, but every time I watch one of these shows where they have like an exorcism going on and they call on Jesus and they call on, God, and they call on all these Christian relics and Christian names and deities. And I always wondered, what if the demon doesn't abide by Christianity?
Or any spirit to be that.
Like that,
right.
That works for the people doing the exorcism. But why does that necessarily have to work to get rid of the demon? Maybe the demon says, "Who's that? I don't care who's this guy?
Mm-hmm.
Jesus who?" And it's goofy because you see people do this all the time, and it's just like not everybody believes the same thing. We don't have everyone in the world that believes the same type of religious dogma. So it's fascinating when I watch that.
It is interesting, and I think that's actually a newer development in the history of exorcisms. You do find that in the Bible there's a discussion about, actually a story about Jesus, who was an exorcist himself. And so he would banish a spirit in his name, Jesus' name, and that sort of thing. But other than that, when you really look at the very ancient origins of exorcisms, very recognizable depictions of exorcism can be found as far back as 4,000 years ago. And those are written in the cuneiform tablets left by the Sumerians. Mm-hmm. And so what's interesting there is archaeologists have found many of these Mesopotamian medical texts that outline exorcism rites that appear very similar to those of the Catholic Church. And of roughly 1,000 of the tablets that the British Museum has, 660 of them specifically reference exorcism. And one thing that they did a lot of different interesting things to perform these exorcisms. But one of the things that's very similar to what we'd see, say, in movies or even actual exorcisms, is this idea that the priest has to learn the name of the demon, and that demon, has to be recognized that way. So rather than saying, in the name of this particular god or that particular god, the ancient model was more focused on trying to get the name of this particular demon that was possessing the patient or the victim, because it was something that was looked at as medical. Right. So in a way, the priest would come in and he acted as a physician as well. And by looking at certain symptoms that the patient would exhibit, he could determine what the demon was. And so in some way, it was like a way that they used as a diagnosis. So they would say, oh, okay, well, this is the demon, Pazuzu, and that has you down. That's why you're nauseous or having this fever. If we know it's Pazuzu and you can verify that, here's the prescription for it. And so it used to be more focused on the name of the demon, and then later it developed. Still, there's that element of what is your name, demon?
Right.
But it's more focused now on the religious solution as opposed to like a medical solution, how it once was. Sort of like going back in a way, like regressive. It used to be about medicine, then it went to religion, and now it's back to medicine. I would think in some ways, but there are still exorcisms being performed to this day. They're not regarding medicine as much as they are focused on religion, clearly. So,
and having looked,
what goes around comes around.
Yeah. And having looked into this as much as you have, how much of that, in your opinion, is placebo? Like, do you believe that there's actually something there, or do you think it's just people believing there's something there and therefore they're healed?
Yeah, that's a really great question because, it speaks to the power of belief. Is belief enough to maybe heal? And if that's the case, then we're really looking at, the question of being real. If it's real, then sure, it's real because it's having real outcomes. It's really working for the person and that sort of thing. So it really is a broader question about the placebo effect in general. But overall, it's interesting to think that while we may think it's more likely the placebo effect or there could be a disease, there are scientists that are looking into the possibility that demons exist and not only exist, but can be measured or captured or found somehow in the bloodstream. So it's a weird sort of germ theory of I guess demonology, if you will. This is going on in Morocco since the 1990s. They've had this theory of demonology and germ theory, and they have this full molecular explanation for demons, and they have these scientific models and some different things that are quite fascinating. But according to them, they believe that evil spirits are invisible to the naked eye, like microbes. Mm-hmm. And so that's why they, are so small, and that's why they like to be in the dark. They've built this entire, like I said, model around it, but they even have made mathematic formulas that supposedly track the activity of them and can predict their behavior. And so while some people would surely at this point say, well, it's placebo effect or it's still religious or what have you, there are people who are putting effort into looking at it in a scientific way. So sort of fascinating. And so I guess it really does come down to the question of what does it mean to be real? If it's real enough to have an outward consequence in the real world, then maybe that should suffice.
And I would assume that when you're in that moment, if you have someone who is supposedly possessed in front of you, and there's that urgency there to get that person well, you're not going to want to say, well, hey, let me study this person, let me put them through scientific testing.
Yeah,
it's like get the demon out now, get it out now,
Right, and then that's exactly right. And so there's even some psychiatrists that incorporate exorcisms into their practice because they believe that it has therapeutic benefits, at least to that person.
Huh.
And so, it may not work for everybody, but if they're with a patient and they feel that this patient has a strong religious belief or maybe needs something like a ritual or a milestone, there are psychiatrists that will actually facilitate an exorcism.
Yeah, and that speaks a lot to, we talk a lot about manifesting your own reality in this world, and how there's not that I could get all that scientific, but there's tests which basically have proven that when you look at particles, they react based on whether they are or are not being observed. They are able to be one thing or another, and the difference is whether there is someone observing them at the time. So that that translates into, what is reality around us? Is it are we making all this up in our own heads? Is there nothing behind me because I can't physically see it behind me? Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So that kind of speaks to what you're saying here in terms of belief, that you're talking about how they talk about demons being in your blood and it being a physical manifestation of sickness. Well, maybe it is and maybe it isn't. Or maybe they just believe that it is, and then they believe that it's healed.
Right. And yes, and at that point, that's when you have to sort of, there's different ways to look at this in a scientific way. I mean, obviously there's a practical objective sense where we want to be able to identify those supposed microbes and, analyze them and understand them and observe them.
Right.
But then there's also this sort of lived experience approach to this. Is it working for people? Are they healed? Are they, how is this working with their soul, their body, their mind, that whole, holistic approach? And so I don't know that there's one right or wrong answer. I think it's part of the, the problems we have with our sort of body of knowledge as it is, the idea that we've separated that, science from spirit, the body-mind connection. And so I think there's multiple things happening in multiple corners, and there's right and wrong to both. And so definitely, I think there's something to be said for the practice. I've seen it done, and I've talked to exorcists. I interview one in the book, and I've also spoken to people who've had it done, and they swear by it. So, to each his own.
Right,
if
right.
it works.
Right. Now, one of the most interesting things I thought about your book is you have certain facts in there, kind of like WTF facts. Like, wow, I never knew that. And one of the facts surrounds probably the biggest evil that anybody in Christianity could come up with, and that's Lucifer. And you talk about how Lucifer may not be quite exactly what everyone believes him to be, or at least everyone in the Christian world believes him to be.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, that's something that along the way through just different forms of media, the idea of Lucifer has been merged with Satan, the devil, all of these things. But even Lucifer, the name that would be synonymous now with the devil, it simply means light bearer. And so this is something that we don't typically imagine demons having anything to do with light or any sort of goodness. But Lucifer was a demon that came down from the heavens. And so this is a whole different model to begin with. And so it's just one of those things where it's actually written about in Ezekiel, I believe, the whole story of Lucifer's fall from grace. And so Lucifer at one point was this ascended figure. And he was perfect and holy and beautiful and bright as light, but then he fell out of favor with God. And so, it really had most to do with this poem from the 17th century called Paradise Lost from John Milton. And in this poem, he presents Lucifer, who he then calls Satan, as this proud and ambitious angel who just rebelled against God. And in this account, the fallen angel enters the Garden of Eden and takes shape of a snake. But it basically got really co-opted and turned into something completely different. Mm-hmm. And so the name Lucifer itself just actually was a personification of the morning star, which is a being or a myth that has been in indigenous cultures since way before Christianity. And so this idea of Venus, the morning star, the bearer of light, it just, took a different form later. And now when you say the word Lucifer, you certainly think devil,
right?
Satan himself, that sort of thing. But, it's how some of the books of the Bible the characters from the books of the Bible have been referenced in a lot of different poems and a lot of different epics. Another good example of that is Dante's Inferno. That's where they get the idea of limbo from a lot of that, older poetry. Mm-hmm. And limbo itself is never mentioned in the Bible, and that's one of those places where the unbaptized babies would go, or also purgatory, where so a lot of these things then become doctrine of the church, or at least folk doctrine. And so there's a lot of mixing up of things, and we just accept it now as sort of the status quo. But when you really dig into it, no pun intended, you find that there's a lot more to sort of piece together from it all.
Right. And if you follow the Gnostic religion, it actually flips it all on its head. And the snake, for example, in the Garden of Eden was there to give knowledge. It wasn't an evil thing at all. It was a good thing. He was the good guy in that scenario, and God was the bad guy for shutting that down. So it really depends on your point of view. It's all about your perspective.
Yes, and it depends on what text you have access to, because as you said, the Gnostic texts have a lot of that. And so if you have that information, then you can look at it that way. Or if you don't, or if you have just, pop culture or Milton or medieval poetry. And at the end of the day, there's just countless documents that reference these themes, and, and we've interpreted it in so many different ways. And so, there's definitely differences in how we can interpret these things. And so it is quite fascinating when you look into how one can have it completely flipped on its head and the other. And some of that also then speaks to this idea of, the turning something upside down. Because what do you do then when you come across these documents that may affect how you think of your own belief system or the historical narrative that came before you, that Lucifer may have been bad, and then you find these documents that say he's good? well, it's this theme that you have in a lot of religious thinking, that opposites, are the duality. So if you have something, good, then it would be, say, the devil who flips it upside down and makes it bad, or, so it's a way to also argue against the other person's point, saying,
Right.
well, of course Lucifer would be, good in the Gnostic text. Those are blasphemous texts, and that's why they're gone. And so then the Gnostics can say, well, of course that's why we're not, so it's this back and forth argument. So
Right.
I think it's fascinating when you have an era. We're in a time now where we can look at all of those texts
Yeah.
and really pick apart where did these come from, and how far back, and what were their similarities as well.
You come to find out everyone's all just making it up.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody really knows. They're all
Right.
just making it up.
It's like, yeah, let's come up with this
At
idea
the end
today.
of the day, we're going to find. At the end of the day, we're going to find a scroll, and it's going to we're going to be rickrolled on the scroll, I'm sure. We're going to find it's been one big joke this whole time.
Right, right. So there are billions, literally billions of Catholics out there that go through communion. I'm not sure how, I'm not Catholic, so I don't know how often it is, but they go through communion. And what you have in the book here is an interesting story about how that actually ties into human sacrifice. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. The communion, I was raised Catholic, so I can say that you do it every Mass. And so that was, that's every Sunday then. And it's not only Catholic, there's a lot of, religions that do that. They take the host and they recreate that Last Supper. So later in the New Testament, Jesus offered himself as the sacrificial lamb, as most people, understand who know Christianity. And the Eucharist feast, which is the communion, consisted at one point of bread and wine that, when it's consecrated, is believed to become the body and blood of Christ, which is mixing the body and blood of the innocent sacrifice with flour, as in bread. And that is the sacrament of Holy Communion. And to do that is to partake in an alternative sacrifice to those in the days of, actually human sacrifice. That was sort of one of the ideas behind it. Moloch, some people are familiar maybe with that particular entity. It's spoken about in the Bible. It's also depicted in some different art as an owl sometimes. But it is a legend, or this idea of, and some say that it wasn't real, so that's something I want to clarify. Mm-hmm. But we have a lot of evidence to suggest that this is how it was, but of course it's not necessarily primary source account. Some of it comes from the Romans, and so there's a lot of murkiness here. But the overall idea is that, in this particular time, people were sacrificing their children essentially to this entity. They were doing it through fire, and human sacrifice was becoming something very common. And in Jesus' time, the idea was to have that, I guess, end as part of the new covenant, the new promise. Mm-hmm. And in order for that to happen, they had to actually have the sacrifice that somebody ate as well. So it was it sounds really gruesome and awful, but before then, in order to make amends with your God, you would actually have to sacrifice either an animal, or depending on how bad the deed was, or what favor you were trying to get from God, it would be a human being. When you did that, you would partake in the cannibalism of that. And very gruesome, as you can imagine. And so the idea is that Jesus came to stop that behavior, usher in a new promise, a new covenant, and by offering himself as that sacrificial lamb. But the only way to accomplish it was still if the people took part in, the sacrifice, and then the eating, the partaking of the body and blood. And so that was, I guess the idea behind the sacrament in some ways. And it's changed here and there with the doctrine and dogmas, and different theologians have explained things differently. But that's the very basic premise of the communion wafer.
Right. Now, in the book you talk...
And that's why it's so important. Mm-hmm.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, so that's why it's so important with a lot of religions when they argue whether or not the concept of transubstantiation, whether or not there is actual Jesus in the bread, or if it's just simply, bread. And that's sort of an argument that's an in-the-weeds sort of theological argument that can take place in a lot of these different denominations. But that's why it's so important, because it would negate its sacrificial power, in a sense, if there wasn't actually human body and blood in it. I know that really probably wrecks the image for a lot of people if they go to mass on Sunday and really think carefully about what they're doing. But it's tradition. So
yeah. Well, you talk about tradition having to do with human sacrifice in a few different aspects. You mentioned a couple of things you mentioned in the book are bonfires and the Burning Man event held out in Nevada every year. These things harken back also to the idea of human sacrifice in our ancient past. In your opinion, do you think that people nowadays really would care if that became common knowledge, that that's where all that stuff came from? Or have we gotten to a point where just the community aspect of an event or a ritual is more important than what the event actually means?
That's a great question. I really think that at this point, people just want to have fun. I think that everybody going out to Burning Man is just looking for, a whole lot of fun. And I don't think anyone's really, maybe a few people really care, but I really don't think that it has to do with that anymore. I think, in fact, the idea that, lighting these huge bonfires, the term bonfire itself came from bone fires, a reference to the origins in the human sacrifice. And so, this is something that I think some people are familiar with, but even if they're not, I just don't think that it matters so much as what it is that they're doing, which is getting together to do something social. And in some ways, I think that as gruesome as it may have been, some of those human sacrificing, rituals did the same thing. So it was another way that people got together and, I guess, have fun. And we don't want to think about that, but it's not uncomfortable to think that humans could find fun in that. But then you have to remember the gladiatorial games and
right.
We have a propensity for violence and interest in watching violence. And it wasn't so long ago we were, just still doing public, executions and things like that. So we do have this innate desire to watch violence, unfortunately. And so even then, when they were doing the bonfires and the human sacrifice, it was still a party. They were still partying. Right. So I think the party element of it is probably stronger than even the religious element of it.
Yeah, yeah. Now, part of your book deals heavily with witchcraft, and this is something that was really prevalent back in from the 15th to the 18th century, when witch hunting was an obsession in Europe. And it appears that it started in Scotland and it kind of just spread all over the continent for 300 or 400 years. What was it that triggered that, in your opinion, as far as being the match that lit the flame, that it went from being an innocuous little annoying, very sparsely used complaint about people to this overwhelming, just crazy, everybody went on attack mode, basically, for 300 years.
Yeah. You hesitate to use the term witch hunt.
Right.
It's a literal witch hunt.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think it really does come down to King James. He was infamous. He actually wrote a King James Bible, but he also wrote a book on demon hunting. He was infamous for his obsession with demon hunting, witchcraft, witches, and that sort of thing. He really spent a lot of work, a lot of time writing about these endeavors of his. And so there was a point in 1589, after he married Anne of Denmark. They sailed from Denmark to Scotland, and over the next month, weird things started happening to them. The injuries to the crew members, there were gun explosions, 2 sailors died, terrible storms happened, and Anne's crew refused any further attempt to reach Scotland because by that point it was already October. They just found themselves in a huge mess over this endeavor of theirs, and she almost died as a result. So at this point, King James is like, "Oh no, this has to be witchcraft." he actually heard that it was. There was like supposedly, this idea that these witches were cursing them. And at this point, he just decided, for whatever reason, he was going to take this on as his own cause. And as you mentioned, it was popular, this idea of, witchcraft and hunting witches and that sort of thing, but it died down. It wasn't quite, as big of a deal. But he resurrected it. And even while he was trying to resurrect this idea of a witch hunt and making a book that would outline the details on how to test for witches, how to find them, he had this down to a science. And even as that was happening, a lot of people weren't on board with it. They were like, yeah, okay. But, he's the king. And so he really did whip everybody up into a frenzy about this.
Was this just
so it really does. Mm-hmm.
No, I'm saying, was this just hubris on his part? Like he just could not, as the king, he had such an opinion of himself that he could not just believe that it was bad luck, that there had to be some reason?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's dead on. I think, because he was a conspiracy theorist. He really was. He thought that everything, I guess you could say he was a narcissist, but he was a narcissist and conspiracy theorist in a lot of ways. And you can debate, like, well, did he have a right to be? Because in some ways, yes, given who he was, and, it is not uncommon to constantly be under threat during that time, even by your own family members. So he was raised in a culture of paranoia in a lot of ways, and self-aggrandizing, because he's the king.
Right.
And so and it didn't help that he was obsessed with religion and demons and witches and supernatural things. And, but he experienced a tragic and violent death of his mother, Mary, Queen of Scots. And so, he had gone through some stuff. He had, at this point, you could look back and say, this man is real human being, this historical figure, but real human being probably had, PTSD and paranoia and who knows what, and maybe vitamin deficiencies for all we know. He was basically, but all that stuff affected everybody around him because he put in, a search. It was basically the start of the serious search for witches.
It's funny you mentioned PTSD. That was actually part of the next question I had written down, not specifically with regard to King James, but just in general, when you're talking about witch trials. The thing that I found fascinating about reading we've done shows on witch trials before, and whenever I hear an account, it seems interesting to me that at some point during the accusation, the victim goes from denying it to agreeing that, yes, I am a witch. And I wonder if that is, them just giving up under torture, or do they actually get brainwashed via some PTSD where they literally started to believe themselves because they were told over and over and over and over again over weeks or months, and they actually started to think, maybe I am.
They were convinced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it very well could have been that they were convinced. And we don't know, too, what sort of things they went through in terms of the torture. There was a lot of ways you could torture someone, whether it be, the medieval torture devices we're familiar with, or simply keeping somebody awake or depriving them of food. And so all of these traumatic, events would definitely affect their ability to think clearly on top of that. And so they'd be highly suggestible at that point. So it very well could have been that they believed it at any rate, that they didn't just say it because they were under pressure, but they might have actually started to believe it at least.
Right.
Very well could have been.
Yeah. Now, one of the things it's a part of a lot of different witchcraft trials has always been the devil's book. They signed the devil's book and pacts with the devil, and these were supposedly literal documents. But I wondered how would this work? Because if you think about it, in a normal sense, with an agreement that's drawn up between two people, it's done so because if one defaults, then an arbiter can see the document and hold the offending party accountable. But in the mind of the people who claim that they were signing the devil's book or had a pact with the devil, how exactly would that work? Because who would the third-party arbiter be?
Wow, that's a really good question. I have not found any real legitimate answer to that outright, but I think that it could be argued that God himself could be the one to arbitrate that, being that, God is the supreme deity ultimately. And, there's a lot of theological questions about, well, God allowed the devil to exist. And in some ways, with human beings being granted free will, it's just that idea of, well, if God is the judge too, so it may have been actually the third party was intended to be God himself. And so he, would use the devil as a tempter or someone to test and tempt the human being who has free will and free choice in that matter. And so at the end of the day, those two parties are engaged in this sort of contract or back and forth, and the main arbiter might actually be God himself.
So God said you basically screwed yourself.
I think it's probably more of a theological question. Yeah. Yep, probably.
I'm sorry, I cut you off there. You said something about a theological question?
I think that might actually be a good theological question, but I've not found anything explicit in the literature to answer that particularly. But it's interesting, though. It
was just an interesting thought I had, because I always saw this in the accounts, and either the devil, but the devil being the devil, if you want to play the game of if they're actually what they claim to be, he's going to try and get away with whatever he can. So you really can't use him. So there's got to be some somebody mediating this agreement.
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely right.
So one of the darker chapters in your book, it was actually one of my favorite chapters, was one where you highlight some horrific archaeological finds. Can you give a couple of examples of what you mentioned in the book as far as just this crazy stuff that was found in these archaeological digs that made people cringe, basically?
Well, one of them that was pretty cringeworthy is a Neolithic massacre site that was found in Herxheim, Germany. And this site, it's actually still in the process of being excavated. So since the writing of the book, there's been more found. So when I wrote the book, though, at that point, it was a team of European archaeologists that excavated this huge bone pit. And it was from a Neolithic site. It showed evidence of not necessarily just a mass burial, but evidence of carnivorous feasts. And so what really was interesting was that these were human bones. They showed traces of scratches and the marks that would be consistent with removing the meat off the bone. And, you could initially think, well, maybe this village then had gone through some difficult times and they had to do what they had to do to survive. Or maybe this was ritual or something that was, a funerary rite, which you sometimes see in cultures. But the more that the archaeologists explored, the more they found that these bones had been eaten and cooked in a way that indicated they were feasting on them as sort of like a party. And so some of the bones, they were charred, and one of them in particular, they found vertebrae that had been cracked open and cooked and used to, eat the marrow inside, and a lot of evidence of them skewering these peoples. And so they definitely engaged in regular acts of cannibalism. So what was strange was how many there were. And what they ended up doing was they looked at the DNA of this. So they looked at the DNA of the bodies that they found, and they showed that they were actually migrants from other areas of Europe, going all the way as far as northwest France. And so they thought that none of them were from the village. And so the question is, why would this Neolithic farming community in Central Europe be taking all of these foreigners and eating them? And so then you have to look at, well, who were the bodies? Who were they eating? There wasn't even a great answer for that, because it wasn't just the men or the sick. It was everybody. There were babies, women, elderly, healthy people, unhealthy people, you name it, they ate them. Right. They ate every single person that came their way. And this whole thing only happened within the course of 50 years, and then it mysteriously stopped. And we're talking hundreds of bodies.
Right.
Hundreds and hundreds of bodies, and they're still excavating those pits now to find that over 50 years, if you got near that village, you were going to be not just attacked and eaten, but feasted upon and celebrated, and you'd never come out of that. So
Right.
that's a strange one.
And these people came from, it wasn't
Yeah.
the next village over. This was quite a distance. And we didn't have, you
Yeah.
know, mail or the internet or like, how did they find out about going to this one specific place? It's weird.
It is strange, and it's well, did they accidentally come upon it, or were they making a pilgrimage to this place in some sort of strange, voluntary human sacrifice? Is what some people have speculated that it could be, as some sort of pilgrimage that they made to volunteer themselves for this purpose. But again, there's really no great supporting evidence for that. But it still remains a mystery, and they're still excavating the site, only to find more and more people.
Now, you said that the site was in existence, the village where they did this was in existence for about 50 years, but were the bones, have they found proof that the people were killed over the span of that 50 years, or could it have been a one-shot deal where they had one, massive killing spree, or whatever you want to call it?
That's a great question. I think that they have determined that it was over a period of time. It wasn't necessarily one massive killing spree, especially considering that the 500 individuals that they've documented so far, at least in their initial report, were both elderly people and newborns, and they think that at least well over 1,000 individuals were involved. So, the possibility of it being maybe an invasion, it's hard to say, but it looks as though that would have been a huge group of people to come in all at once that they would have done that too. So right. I think the evidence shows that it was over a span of that time. Okay. But for what reason, we don't know. But we do know they enjoyed it. They didn't just slash and chew. They cooked them, skewered them, made them into a whole feast.
Made it count.
Pretty awful.
They made it count.
Right. Go big or go home.
Yeah, right. So, any other favorites? I have a couple written down here, but I don't know if you had any other favorites from that chapter.
Oh, favorites. It sounds so gruesome when you put it that way, right?
Your favorite gruesome killing, yes.
What's my favorite worst killing? I don't know. I think that one was pretty favorites. I think that one was pretty decent. I mean, I know one of the sites I also think is fascinating and gruesome for different reasons would be ossuaries in general. The the adornment of the bones of different people. That's something that I touch on in the book as well. Right. But there's so I think any time that you have the human body displayed in such a way that it's almost utilitarian or just takes away its humanity, I think that's the point where it's most frightening. And so,
right.
Yeah. So I don't know what your favorites would have been, but I think, there's a lot in them.
Yeah. I like the Vampire of Venice. I like the Frozen Mummies. They were fun stories too.
The Frozen Mummies was very sad too. That was pretty awful. And
well, I didn't say it was fun for them.
Sad at the same time. Right. No, I mean, even to no. Even to write about it, I found myself as I was writing that. I found myself oh gosh, this is awful.
Right.
Yeah. It's not for the faint of heart, but I'll say that.
So what is your opinion on, this is a topic that we haven't dealt with a whole lot here, but I do want to do a couple shows on it because I think it's fascinating. What is your opinion on the idea that there were giants around at some point?
Well, I think that that's probably the case, but I don't think that the word giants is really, I think that's another one that's a really loaded word, because if you say giant, some people may think of Jack and the Beanstalk-sized giants, Mm-hmm. So I think the idea, I think that there were definitely people taller than average, but their maximum growth probably didn't exceed 10 feet, if that even. But you see this account a lot in Sumerian records and this sort of thing. So if you consider too how large, or how small rather, the people were in the hunter-gatherer types, I mean, they were shorter people and shorter of stature. So if they're, in my opinion, a lot of those stories come from the idea of invading peoples coming from possibly the north, or at least people that, had better nutrition, maybe agrarian people that used dairy and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
They were probably, many feet bigger than the hunter-gatherer establishments in places in the Fertile Crescent. At that point, it wasn't really a Fertile Crescent because they weren't farming, but the semi-sedentary people were very small. And so if you were about 4'5", and very frail, and you see somebody coming your way and they're maybe 6'3" and very robust, and they're going to seem like giants in the way
Right.
you describe them. And so I think some of that comes down to that. However, there have been stories of different remains being found and hidden in the Smithsonian of huge, femurs and
Mhm.
skulls. And so, I would imagine that if something like that were found, it would probably be hidden, because that would be something so earth-shattering that they wouldn't want to, come out with that necessarily. But I will say that if you look online, a lot of people put out these pictures of these giant bones, and most of those are photoshopped. And so I
Right.
think to really say, yes, there were giants, or no, there were giants, I think it's really more of a, nuanced answer. So I think, yes, the idea of giants, definitely real. How big were they? That's another question. Were they these huge, mythic, magical beings? Probably not. But,
Right.
if you were living in that time, it probably would seem so.
And you say
But I
that.
don't think we're ready.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go
Oh,
ahead.
I just think that it's amazing. If you go to the Smithsonian even now and you look at their Hall of Origins and you see all the different skulls of different hominids, the variations are just amazing. And so I think it's a mistake to think there's a missing link where there's this lineage of it progresses in such a, perfect way up a sort of scale. I think that's not the case at all. And I think that it would not be surprising if we found some remains that were really big and out of the range of
Right.
what, we would believe to be possible. So,
Right. Now you say that if the Smithsonian were to get proof of there being actual, 20-foot tall giants or whatever it might be, that they would probably not
Mhm.
make that public. Is that just all about academic reputation and not having people who have put their life's work into saying that there was no such thing be proven wrong? Or is there some other fear there that I'm not understanding?
I think it would have to do with the life's work aspect of it, but then also, I think also some of it has to do with maybe conflicts of interest. Sometimes, and I've written about this in previous work that I've done, what you'll find is that the people who will fund excavations, it's not always just taxpayers or university endowments and this sort of thing. It can be oftentimes big corporations or private individuals who are also themselves collectors of antiquities. And that is a huge problem I wrote about in a book called The Sumerian Controversy. And that's something that I think really does play a part in it now. So if they were to find something like that, you'd have to wonder, well, who's funding it? Because maybe they will want that for their own private collection. And for what reasons? Well, it can get really wacky up there at the top when you have all your needs met, and you have all the things you have, more money, more time, and you start to think a lot. When you're poor and you have weird ideas, you're crazy. If you're rich and you have weird ideas, you're eccentric. And so when you're very wealthy and you want those bones for who knows what,
Right.
you may just have them. So it's hard to say exactly, but it gets a little, less transparent the further up you go.
Yeah, I believe it. Well, Heather, I want to thank you for coming on tonight, and I do want to have you give our listeners a chance to hear where you are selling your books, and if there's a website you want to put out there, they can find more of your work. Please do so.
Thank you. Well, you can find me at www.drheatherlynn.com. My books are at Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, anywhere books are sold, and obviously Amazon, because that's where everything is sold. It's on audiobook and Kindle and paperback, and but you name it. But, yeah, my website is definitely the hub. So if anyone wants to visit, It's www.drheatherlynn.com. Thank you so much for having me tonight. It's been a real pleasure.
Absolutely.
And
And
I'm
we-
actually I'm posting that on our Paradelphia Facebook page right now. So
all right. Well, we definitely would love to have you back if you
Thank you.
if you come back on for the next book. I'm sure it'll be as interesting as this. This was really one. As I said at the beginning of the interview, I couldn't put this down. It was really a cool read.
Oh, thanks so much. That means a lot to me. I really appreciate it.
So again, thank you for coming on, and best of luck to you. And hopefully we'll hear from you again soon.
Will do. Have a good night.
all right.
Take care, Heather.
Thank-
Bye-bye.
Huh.
Again, that was Dr. Heather Lynn, her book, Evil Archaeology. We didn't touch on even, half of what was in this book.
was gonna
It's
say-
really cool.
And it's funny because when you think archaeology, but then you throw the evil archaeology, it just takes it to a whole new
Yeah.
level.
It's about archaeological digs and things that were found, but she gives the history and, like I said, some of those facts that are kind of like you wouldn't expect, like the whole thing with the human sacrifice behind the communion, things like that. The tale of Lucifer not being so evil,
Right.
Yeah,
So, everyone, I feel like just like anything else, everyone's got their own interpretation of things, especially when we get into that whole conversation of religion, which, how that goes. But, just like anything else, and again, we're digging deep like she did. I mean, it is. It's very, very fascinating. Just another, way of putting it all together. So,
all right.
awesome.
So we're going to take a break here, and when we come back on the flip side, we will start wrapping the show. Back here on Paradelphia on Toxic Radio. And again, I want to thank Dr. Heather Lynn, who wrote Evil Archaeology, for stopping by and talking to us tonight. It was a very interesting interview about her book, about archaeological finds, about the nature of evil, some religious topics were thrown in there. So it was a very cool interview.
And like you said, right as soon as we went into the break, that, we didn't even touch a quarter of what goes on. It's just another one of them things where you could just keep going, turn into a couple episodes, or if we had a 4-hour show, maybe get into that quarter, at least quarter worth of it. So
all right. So before we leave tonight, we do have one order of business we have to finish up here and wrap up. Miss Jenna B.
Well, my mic's off.
There's a reason for that, Miss Jenna
I
B.
hacked into the Toxic Radio.
Shut them off. Let me talk.
Jenna wanted me to shut you guys off.
Shut them off. Cut them off.
I'm sure she did.
Lily's going to figure out a way to shut everybody off, and then she's going to come on the air and be like, okay, I'm taking over.
Yeah.
So leading into next week we are going to have a dark week. We'll probably have to play a best of episode.
So she has no reason not to get to it
because
she has an extra.
I have not missed a single movie. The only one I shut off. I shut it off intentionally, Richard. Richard.
She moved the mic away so she could see me. I just moved it back.
Yeah.
What did you just say? Yeah.
Simi needs a Rick Dick.
So
what?
I don't know. Rick
Roll.
Richard.
Rick.
Short for Richard is Dick.
I think Doug's on his meds again.
I think so.
Actually, if I'm on my meds, it means I'm good.
Yeah, he's off.
And he's off his meds.
It's the bad meds.
He went to my personal med collection downstairs at the bar.
No, I don't want nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
I don't want to know nothing.
Mike has the best wine. I wish I could
do.
drink it.
I was drinking it.
Do you know that that's not wine, right? You need to give Jenna some of the absinthe stuff and see how she is.
Listen,
have you ever had that
No.
absinthe?
When I can drink, I'm gonna do my first shot on the show.
Ooh.
First and last.
I'm gonna make sure I have off the next
You're
day.
going to hear.
I'll be like, this was great.
That's what I say. I think it would be very exciting to see you take absinthe. Is that still illegal in this country?
I am a freaking blast in a glass.
I literally asked Mike a question. He
was
rolled
talking-
his eyes. Was like, you don't know that.
They sell it in store. You can buy it in stores.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a version of it.
Oh, that's right. It's at. So it's also called Surge.
No, if I'm gonna give Jenna anything, I'm gonna give her a cocaine bomb.
Oh.
What? I get drug tested. I cannot.
It's cocaine
do
energy
that.
drink.
Oh yeah, you were telling me about it.
And Jaeger Jägermeister.
Jaeger bombs.
Oh,
Jaeger
good
bombs. Jaeger bomb. Jaeger bomb. Jaeger bomb. Jaeger bomb.
Yeah, that used to be. Yeah, there was a thing.
Well, we
that
do
was-
cocaine bombs
It
because we're
was
toxic.
It was called an 8-ball back in the day.
Is that
You
what
know
it was
what?
called?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
hope somebody like storms this apartment, be like, "We overheard you," like just a big drug. Not that they'll find anything,
But that's the thing,
just the inconvenience.
They'll find
Mike's-
energy drinks.
Mike's
Drug-
like, I was
yeah,
up all night.
They're gonna find action figures, energy drinks, and video games.
Yeah, exactly.
They're gonna be, sir, how old are you?
They're gonna be like, if being a screwed up nerd was illegal, oh, we'd be taking you away right now.
Sir, where are your parents?
But unfortunately, we feel bad for you, so
Yeah.
You live here alone? Oh.
All right. So getting back on track,
yeah, you know.
we need to give Jenna B a movie to
Yeah.
review next week or in 2 weeks, and Mike is going to do the honors this week.
Thank you, guys. I because this is the reason why I wanted to give her this is because she did say how the Toxic Avenger was on the top of her list of the movies she has seen.
Her list of 3 movies.
Yeah. right.
Has it been 3? I thought it's been 4. No.
Out of 3, top.
Yep.
So I wanted to give her my next top movie by Troma, not another Toxic Avenger, but the next top movie by Troma on my list, which is Tromeo and Juliet.
And the
Romeo and
synopsis is Stacy thought it would be a first date. She thought it would be a perfect night in a new town until she met him.
Boy, your voiceover work.
She was not the first and would not be the last to find terror and death waiting for her.
What the
I told us
hell
nothing.
What just happened?
That was a lot of words that said absolutely nothing.
That was the worst like voiceover that I've ever heard.
I'm reading what it says on the freaking thing.
Yeah, but not like that. Just read it backwards would sound better.
Gosh, this looks like the girl on the cover looks like the
that's-
girl on Will and Grace.
Oh, it
Is
was
she
her.
on it?
Oh yeah.
Is it?
It was her. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Just keep telling her things.
Just keep telling
Yeah.
her things.
It looks just like her.
She'll believe you.
That was Joe Jonas before the sex change.
Shut up. Leave Jonas out
You
of
know what?
this.
Now, if the Jonas brothers were actually a fan of Paradelphia, he's just like, nope, not anymore.
Yeah, he's like, screw you guys.
How'd he know?
Oh, that's a shame.
It is.
When you look me in the eyes.
Oh,
Look
my.
me in the eyes.
This means nothing to them.
It means nothing. All right.
Jeez.
So let's start wrapping things up here. Again, we'll be off next week. We'll
Yes.
come back on the evening of September the 5th
Mm-hmm.
with an all-new show, and it's the beginning of our push for Halloween.
Oh, yeah. Get started on those live, because I know we can definitely, as an employer for Penhurst Asylum, we definitely have that opening to do that. So
Very nice.
I want to stay.
just a long ass drive in a sense.
I
so.
want to stay in. Who is the mobster guy that was there? Caputo?
No, Capone.
Yeah, Caputo.
No,
That's Orange is the New Black.
First of all,
Capone!
Eastern State Penitentiary did not hold anyone famous. Capone stayed at Capone stayed at Eastern State
Oh.
Penitentiary. I'm at Penhurst Asylum.
Penhurst was a bunch of kids.
Yeah, but pretty much.
Oh.
There was all kinds of people. Kids and fucked up people.
I'm scared already.
I've been scared this whole episode.
Yeah. So,
All right, so let's wrap things up. So for Jenna B,
Yes,
for
hoes.
Doug,
for my baby.
for Michael,
My baby Lily.
once again, I want to thank Dr. Heather Lynn. Her book, Evil Archaeology. Go pick it up. I am Rick Pruitt. We are Paradelphia, and we are out of here.
Good night.
Bye.